So with the form added, let's make sure that we don't just print the inputs, but that we actually create a new user with Firebase. Now, earlier in the course, we used the provider package for managing this state and for sending those HTTP requests. We could do this here, but as you will see throughout this module, we don't really need the provider package here. We don't really need this application-wide state management because Firebase, the Firebase SDKs which we're using, will basically manage all relevant state for us because we have that live connection to the server, and Firebase will also do some caching to cache data so that it's even available if we temporarily lose the connection. So we don't really need our own state management. Hence, I will not create any models or any state management classes. I will not add the provider package. Instead, we can go to the Auth screen and maybe handle the request to create a new user there. Because then we have the Auth form for collecting all the inputs and the Auth screen for the heavy lifting of creating a new user. For this here in the Auth screen state, we can add a new function, submit auth form maybe. And this is a function that should get all the data from the auth form as parameters, so as inputs. So there we can get an email, which will be a string. We can get the password, which will be a string, the username, which is a string, and also the information whether we are in login mode or not. And with all of that gathered, here inside of the function, we'll be able to use the Firebase SDK to create a new user or sign an existing user in. That will be step number 2. Step number 1 is that we connect this function here in the auth screen state with our auth form. And that's of course something we covered extensively in the course. We can simply pass down a reference to this method to auth form. So here to auth form as an argument, we can pass down submit auth form. So we can pass down a pointer at this method. And now we just need to accept this inside of auth form. So in the auth form Dart file, here in the widget class, we can add the constructor by repeating the class name. And now I want to accept an argument and store this in a property of this class. For this, I'll add a new property, and that will be a function. And we can actually even define how the function, which we want to get as an argument, should look like. Now we'll get a pointer at that function, but we can define how the function we'll point at should look like. It should be a function that returns nothing, and for this you simply add void in front of function. So function is the type of data we'll have, but this is an extra piece of information for this function type. And you can add parentheses here to then also define the arguments this function which we want to get or which we want to store here in a property should have. We also need to add the property name here, and that will be submitFN, for example. So we'll have a submitFN property here in auth form, and the type of this property is a function which returns nothing and which now should also get some arguments, some parameters. For example, an email, for example, a password, also, of course, the username, and also the information whether we are logging in or not. So the exact same arguments we do expect here in the auth screen. Here, these arguments, they are mirrored here in this type. And then here in the auth form constructor, we can say this submit function to make clear that the argument we're receiving here is bound to this property of this class. And this property here will point at this function we're getting from auth screen. So now in try submit here, instead of printing, we can call widget.submitFN to execute this function we stored in the widget. And to this function, we now need to pass all that data. We need to pass the email, the password, the username, and the isLogin state. So I pass user email. I pass user password and user name, and also isLogin. All that information is passed to this function. And with that back in the auth screen, we'll receive that. And here we can now use the Firebase SDK to create a new user. Let's do that in the next lecture.